The Glacier's Secret by Unknown Baffling Mysteries No. 8, May 1952, Unthaw, The Secrets of the Ancient Ice. Lloyd Raymond jerked at the controls in a frenzy. The little plane refused to respond. Despite the freezing temperature outside the little cabin, a perspiration broke out over his brow. The wind tossed the ship as the swirling ice and snow caked on the window. He cursed as he continued to fight with the levers and buttons. This was one heck of a way to set a new world's record for circling the Earth around the poles. He shoved his head forward in an attempt to see through the blanket covering the windows. If he could only pull above the storm, he might push the ship through, but still no response. His altimeter reading slowly began to drop. For a second, Lloyd considered bailing out, but with the unknown lying below, he decided to take his chances on sticking with the ship. Suddenly, a high plateau loomed before him. The wind was carrying the plane down onto its surface. His vision almost completely blocked. He blinked through the caking ice to make sure it wasn't a mirage. Gradually, the ground came up to meet him. He leaned back in his seat heavily in an attempt to balance the ship into a smooth landing. Then, he felt something firm underneath and relaxed as the wind taxied the plane along. It had almost slowed down to a stop when Lloyd hurled his weight against the sliding cabin and forced it open. In a fraction of a second, he spotted a huge wall of ice looming before the ship, and in a quick leap, bounded out of the cockpit. His side struck the wing as he fell, breaking his fall onto the snow-covered terrain. In the next instant, there was a thud and the sound of grinding metal. Lloyd picked himself up and frowned at the twisted wreckage. The damage was clearly beyond reparation, and the chilling blasts were penetrating his clothes. Keeping close to the wall of ice, for the little protection it afforded, Lloyd edged his way along the flat wastes. The gale was too thick to see very high, but the wall of ice just seemed to continue going upward, never ending, and it was as smooth as a pane of glass. Finally, about 100 yards from the plane, Lloyd stopped. Before him lay the entrance to a cave, right in the ice. At least it was some sort of shelter from the raging storm. Lloyd looked about in awe as he strode inside. As far as he could see, the cave just continued to eternity. A strange light seemed to reflect beautiful colors as he went deeper. Then he suddenly came to a halt, half shocked out of his wits. Before him, frozen in the ice, stood a gigantic 8-foot giant, dressed in furs and armor, clutching a magnificent shield on one arm and holding an ancient, weighty battle-axe with his other hand. So ferocious did the Viking-like figure look that Lloyd recoiled for a moment, as if expecting a blow from the axe to be rained down on him. But he quickly composed himself and stepped closer. And now his eyes fell upon two other people. The first was also dressed as a warrior, and from his position was obviously indulging in battle with the Viking holding the upraised battle-axe. The third member of the frozen group, half reclining on the ground, in an obvious attempt to crawl away from the two battlers, was a girl. She was young and beautiful with long, flowing, blonde hair. There was no doubt in Lloyd's mind. These people, remarkably preserved in the ice, were of the Viking age and at least 1,000 years old. But as Lloyd stood marveling at the sight, a sudden chilling blast of wind shook him. He realized he wouldn't last long unless he could find some protection in the way of heavier clothing. And here, he took more careful notice of the furs that the Vikings wore. An idea suddenly came to him. Turning about, he sped out of the cave toward the ship. 15 minutes later, he drained a large can of the plane's fuel onto the icy pathway of the cave in front of the glacierized figures. A flick of his cigarette lighter set up a blaze which blanketed the entire wall. As the flame died down, Lloyd continued pouring more of the gas until, at length, the icy wall of the cave began to melt. Once the figures were freed, he thought, he'd be able to help himself to their warm, protective covering. He waited, warming himself by the fire as the thinning ice brought the figures closer. Shortly after, they were completely freed. Lloyd hesitated a moment, then stepped closer. But suddenly, he recoiled in horror. The Viking with the upraised battle-axe suddenly moved. He was alive! With a bellow that echoed throughout the cave, he brought the heavy weapon down, barely missing Lloyd. Terrified, he made an attempt to escape but found his path blocked by the other Viking, who was moving in for the kill. With agile footwork, Lloyd managed to avoid the lunging men. Then, braced against the wall, he found himself between them. He was trapped. Yellow, broken-toothed smiles showed through their matted beards as they closed in. Holding his breath, Lloyd awaited the death blow, but it never came. The girl suddenly leaped forth and flung herself before him. "No," she screamed. "You must not kill him. He's done nothing to harm you. You must take him to Goth first." The Vikings stopped in their tracks as she turned to Lloyd. He stared at her in disbelief. "You," he stammered. "You speak English. Who are you? Where do you come from?" "English?" she questioned. "No, my language is of Anglo land. My people are at war with these giants. They have abducted me. Has my father sent you to rescue me?" The whole story suddenly was obvious to Lloyd. These people, in their state of suspended animation, were not aware of the passing of time from their era into the present. "Listen," he demanded the attention of all of them. "You must understand me. I've just freed you from some sort of an icy grave. You've been buried alive for over 1,000 years. The people you know have been gone for centuries. I don't know how you sustained life all this time, but you've passed 1,000 years into the future." By their expressions, Lloyd could see that they couldn't understand. With grunts, the Vikings prodded Lloyd and the girl along, deeper into the cavern. They seemed to know where they were heading. Finally, they found a branch of the cave blocked by another wall of ice, sheer and transparent. The two Vikings mumbled together and quickly began battering away at the wall. Lloyd and the girl winced as thick chips of ice from the blows rained all around them. "My name is Laurie," she told him as they waited. "These men live in terrible fear of their leader, Goth. This is his throne room, but it appears different than before. How came all this ice?" Lloyd decided to try explaining again. He took his time and explained that they'd probably been suddenly enveloped in a glacier movement and were imprisoned in it until he happened along to free them. When she inquired as to how he'd come along, he told her that with the passing of time, man's mental development had increased to the point of developing many amazing things. And that in this day and age, man could fly like a bird. She stared, awe-stricken. Suddenly they looked up. The two Vikings were just finishing their hacking away at another of their clan seated on a throne. As soon as he was exposed to the air, he too revived. The strange talk that passed between them was translated by Laurie. "Goth is an evil man," she said. "He lives only to make war. He's convinced that you are of my people and have come to rescue me. But now he shall make you lead them to battle with my people. If you refuse, he will kill you." At orders from Goth, the two others quickly grabbed Lloyd and dragged him away. Over his shoulder, he called to Laurie in hopes of discovering where he was being taken. "To their dungeons," she answered. "They think you'll be safe there while they seek Goth's other subjects." The grips of the Vikings were like steel, and Lloyd found it wise not to resist. Eventually, following a trail through the winding caves, they led him down a flight of steps into a dungeon room, where he was thrust into a small cell and chained. The next thing he knew, a hand was shaking him. He gazed up into the smiling face of Laurie. He shuddered to think for a moment that he'd gone to sleep. "There are many of them now, ready to sail forth to my land," Laurie told him. "In celebration of the victory they expect to win, they have wined and dined heavily, and they slumber even now. I have stolen the key to free you." As she spoke, she was undoing his chains. "But where can we escape to?" Lloyd asked. "Not we," she replied. "Just you alone. If it is as you have told me, in the world outside, I have no desire to escape. But come, I will show you the way." Quietly, they slipped back through the caverns. At last, they arrived at the entrance. Lloyd breathed freely as he saw the storm had subsided. As Laurie faced him, a strange light in her eyes, she removed a linked, wrought bronze necklace from her neck and placed it around his. Suddenly, they wheeled about, having heard an unearthly bellowing. Trudging toward them came Goth, the gigantic Viking leader. "Flee," Laurie cried. "Flee before he catches you. He possesses the strength of 100. In one last effort, Lloyd tried to drag Laurie with him, but she refused, adamantly. As he attempted to escape the pursuing Goth, Lloyd slipped on the ice. Goth was upon him in an instant. He hoisted Lloyd high in the air and hurled him down into a bottomless chasm. As he fell, a swirling sensation came over him, and he fainted. "Where am I?" he muttered some time later as he looked up into the friendly face of a doctor. Then he saw himself lying in a hospital bed. Must have had a bad dream, he thought. But then he realized that around his neck was a curiously designed wrought bronze necklace. The end.
The preceding thrilling story has presented for your enjoyment. This classic work is now in the public domain, making it freely available to be shared and appreciated by all. Some elements may appear outdated or insensitive by today's standards, but we present this work in its original form to preserve its historical context and literary significance. Sit back, relax, and indulge in this timeless tale. Please like, comment, subscribe, and share. Every bit helps this channel grow. Thank you.